Hey folks, Zach Osterman here, Insider Indianapolis. Start with your Friday rundown for September 5th, 2025. Just kind of checking in this week. Obviously, a lot of discussion primarily about Indiana football coming off of last week's opener against Old Dominion, a game in which I think it's fair to say the final score and a lot of the sort of underlying numbers really did not match up. Indiana outgains Old Dominion by almost 200 yards, rushes for over 300 yards, 7 red zone trips, including 6 non-garbage time red zone trips, won the turnover battle 3-1, pressured Colton Joseph, Old Dominion's quarterback, 10 times on only 24 dropbacks, and Old Dominion did not take a snap across the 50-yard line throughout the entire game. And yet, Indiana only wins by 13 points, 27-14. Curt Cignetti certainly suggested that he believed Indiana maybe left as many as twice the number of points it scored, maybe even a little bit more, on the field on Saturday afternoon against the Monarchs. But he also called it like Groundhog Day. He said that it was, very similar in his mind to watching maybe not the complexion of the game necessarily, but the overarching idea through the Florida International game in week 1 of last year of just a team not really clicking on all cylinders, missing opportunities. I think in that game for Indiana, it was more missing throws, not great in some third down situations. Whereas against Old Dominion, it was not converting those red zone opportunities. Indiana is only 2 of 6 on touchdowns in non-garbage time red zone chances, only 4 of 6 overall. One of those 2 turnovers on downs started with Indiana, first and goal on the 1-yard line. Fernando Mendoza, I think, was 0 of 5 against pressure in the game. No, anyway, there's a lot that can kind of be unpicked, but I thought we'd do 3 reasons why I think coming out of Old Dominion, Indiana fans should not fret too much. And ahead of course, this weekend's game against Kennesaw State, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Number 1 is the red zone. Indiana was an extreme outlier. They were maybe the best red zone team in America last year. I think they had the most red zone scores, the most red zone touchdowns, second best percentage of red zone possessions converted into touchdowns nationally. You would expect Indiana to be a better red zone team than it was against ODU. To be that good, that's a bit of an outlier in the other direction, as you can imagine, to be that good, to just be that sort of coldly efficient. I think there's some fair things to talk about with Fernando Mendoza being better in the red zone. That was obviously a real strength for Curtis Rourke. Of course, with Indiana just needing to be able to block better, frankly, in those, I think Curt Cignetti said basically inside the 6-yard line was where he saw those drives stalling out. But if you're Indiana, I think you still back yourself to kind of take what went wrong against ODU and really correct it when you get to Kennesaw State and moving forward. I think the second thing is yardage and field position. The total yardage gap in that game did reflect, I think, the difference between a very good Power 4 team and a competitive but middle of the road group of 6 team. I mean, ODU has had some upsets in the recent past. Of course, Cignetti mentioned multiple times they were very, very close to upsetting South Carolina last year. If you are Indiana, if you're an Indiana fan, I think though you look at things like field position, how many Indiana drives advance deep into Old Dominion territory. Again, 6 of 10 non-garbage time drives reached the red zone. I think if you're Indiana, you feel good about the way you move the ball, the process, essentially. And I think that's what a lot of the Old Dominion game boils down to, is process versus result. And I think that with the exception of maybe, as Cignetti referred to on Monday, the quote-unquote red zone plan, I think the process worked for Indiana. And I think Indiana would feel good about the process of, how we move the ball, how we build drives, how we bring different weapons, whether it's in the backfield, the wide receiver core, et cetera, into the offense. And then, what's reflected on the other side too, which is that obviously Indiana's got to fix the mistakes that lead to the 2 big busts on the Colton Joseph 75 and 78-yard touchdown runs. But on the other hand, that accounts for, I think, roughly half of Old Dominion's yards the entire day. I think they only had 1 drive that lasted more than 6 plays. Again, they did not take it. They got into Indiana territory 1 time, committed a false start penalty, immediately back over the 50, and never crossed the 50-yard line again. 3 turnovers to 1. I think you feel good about the process if you are Indiana when you look at, ultimately football games are going to be decided by scoring opportunities, and Indiana, through its the way it won the field position game, the turnover battle, the just the raw yardage game, Indiana is giving itself a lot more scoring opportunities. And if you're Kurt Cignetti, you'd be, I think, a lot more confident in the idea that the more you generate those opportunities, the more often, as this season goes on, Indiana will be able to finish them, rather than being worried about the process not producing enough of them for Indiana to really feel like the offense is working. And then number three, this was only Fernando Mendoza completed less than 60% of his passes. That's only the third time in his college career, which is 20 starts now, that he's completed less than 60%. It's actually only the fifth time that he's been under 63%. I think that you can probably count on Mendoza to be more reliable throwing the ball, to be more consistent, to be more accurate. You can see he's still working on his timing, still learning to trust his protection, still sort of figuring out, chemistry with certain receivers. And of course, Indiana will have stayed vanilla in that game from a play calling standpoint, and probably from a formational standpoint in a lot of ways. You might open a few more things up this week if you're Mike Shanahan. You want to get, you don't want to put too much on film, but you do want to work on things. You want to work on stuff in a game setting and make sure that everyone understands it and everyone can execute it. It's more important for you to have the confidence that it works than it is for you, for an opponent to not see it, if that makes sense. And so maybe open up a little bit more, but I think Indiana can count on the idea that, Fernando Mendoza's sort of accuracy and just command of the offense will improve as he gets more time on task and more live game reps to sort of digest. If we look ahead to Kennesaw State, three big talking points. Dexter Williams is back in Bloomington. I got a chance to talk to Dex on Wednesday night. He's a starting quarterback down at Kennesaw State this season. This will be his last year of college football. He's using his COVID year. Of course, Indiana fans will remember him. Spent 4 years in Bloomington, was part of the recruiting class that was constructed in the midst of the Gator Bowl season under Tom Allen, with Kalen DeBoer and Kane Womack as his coordinators. Those were actually Dexter Williams' two main recruiters, DeBoer and Womack. Williams redshirted, suffered an injury, had that moment in 22, which felt like, I said this to someone earlier today, it felt like such a swinging doors moment, that he leads the comeback at Michigan State. I think people forget Indiana was down big in that game. They were down 3 scores. They come back and they win it in overtime. And then Indiana is in, I think, a really good place in that Purdue game against a Purdue team that won the Big Ten West that year. And just it never really came together for him again after that injury. It was so substantial. And then, of course, the quarterback, or the coaching change rather, happens, and Williams decides to move on. But that there's, I think, an alternate universe where Williams sort of quarterbacks Indiana to a win in that Purdue game. Indiana comes out of that season with a lot of wind in its sails, 2 rivalry wins, 5-7, and the feeling that it's got a quarterback that it can really sort of coalesce around, because you think so much about that 2023 season winds up being defined by Indiana's inability to really sort of pick a quarterback and build around them between Taven Jackson and Brendan Sorsby. That would have been, I think, in a lot of ways, Dexter Williams' team, frankly. And Indiana would have had a whole offseason to sort of refine his process, make him better, build around him, and it ultimately just kind of never comes to fruition. But he is starting at Kennesaw State and really, I think, hoping to make a lot of his last season there. He said something interesting to me, because Kennesaw State, I grew up in North Atlanta. Kennesaw State was a Division II school when I was in school. They only got football a few years ago. The rise from, they were an NAIA school in the 90s. The rise from there all the way to the FBS, all the way to Conference USA, has been incredibly fast and ambitious. And Dexter actually said basically some of the same things that attracted me to IU, about building something that wasn't there before, a different level of ambition, a different level of excitement around the program, were some of the same things that he said attracted him to KSU as well. So it'll be, I think, a fun homecoming for Dexter Williams, with a number of people, not just former players. There were a few that would have been teammates, including a couple of classmates, Khalil Benson and Bryson Bonds, but also, some support staff, some training staff, people like that. Kurt Cignetti talked about point number 2 on Kennesaw State. He said that when they want to, they can move at warp speed offensively, that they are able to play at a tempo that's not even necessarily no huddle, but it is everybody sprint to the line, get set, snap, everybody sprint to the line, get set, snap. And that is both to wear a defense down and I think more pertinently to not allow a defense to sub, not allow a defense to get too many fresh legs in, to get maybe an extended look at what's on the field so that you can send in some fresh signals and adjust not just personnel but scheme and what you're trying to do snap to snap. We saw this with Kevin Wilson early in his time at Indiana and had some mixed results. There's benefits to it and there's sort of pros and there's cons. But that's something that I think Indiana's going to have to face against Kennesaw State that maybe they wouldn't have had to or won't have to against a lot of teams. A lot of teams won't do this. They'll just sort of back their talent, their scheme, their process to do what they need to do. Maybe they go tempo, but still with some huddle or at least with some substituting and some signals from both sidelines. Kennesaw State is going to move like this at times, and that's going to test Indiana's ability to stay organized and communicate. And obviously, if Indiana does allow some drives to go longer, as Wake Forest had, I think, allowed a couple of pretty extensive drives last week in a 10-9 win at home against Kennesaw State. Indiana's going to have to show some stamina too. The third thing I would say is, 37 dropbacks for Wake Forest last season. Kennesaw State with a lot of rotation along that defensive front and that front four and that front six. Kennesaw State registered 15 pressures on 37 dropbacks. That's a really good number. And, Old Dominion wasn't really able to pressure Fernando Mendoza much. I mean, we talked about some of the red zone struggles, but one thing that the offensive line did very well was protect Mendoza and kind of keep his pocket pretty clean against ODU. Kennesaw State's going to come after him, and they're going to try and rotate a lot of different sort of bodies to keep fresh legs in there and be aggressive in the pass rush. And Indiana's got to be able to manage that. And, dare I say, Mendoza's got to be able to manage that because we've talked so much about, one of Mendoza's real points of growth since getting to Indiana has been trusting his protection. He comes from Cal where they really struggled to pass block consistently. Now he's got a better offensive line in front of him, better skill players around him, probably a little bit more sort of favorable scheme. But he's got to learn to trust that. He's got to keep his internal rhythm and his internal timing, be patient, go through a lot of different reads and things. Well, do you do that when you face a team that is really going to try and get in your face in the pass rush? Can that line keep his pocket clean, and can Mendoza trust that pocket? Because I think there were times where he looked a little bit sort of jittery against pressure, though it didn't come often last week against Old Dominion. So those are three big keys for Indiana against Kennesaw State. Really quickly, please like and subscribe to the YouTube channel if you've made it this far. I'm sure you are enjoying, or I hope you were enjoying anyway, what we're putting out there. We have, as I think a lot of folks have noticed, really expanded our subscriber base, our content, trying to bring a lot of different things to you guys this week, or excuse me, this fall, this season, football season, basketball season. Please, the more you like and subscribe and obviously watch our videos, the more that enables us to even keep widening the scope of all this. So please do that. There's also a link to our IU newsletter in the comments down, or in the video description. Please go click on that and subscribe to that as well. That'll get you tons of comment or of IU content from IndyStar.com. So please subscribe, and go check out the newsletter as well if you're so inclined. Just some housekeeping at the end. Junior County is visiting kind of the latest in the parade of recruits coming through. We talked about last week with Tay Kinney. The way this works anymore is you're kind of expected to have like one major recruit on campus per weekend most of the fall. Rather than bringing them all in together, you want one there at a time. Junior County, UConn's also involved there, some other really high level schools. So I think this is going to be a tough recruitment for Indiana, but he's in kind of the final stages, cutting down his list to some of his finalists, and top 40, top 50 player. Indiana is in the mix again. That's good news if you're IU, but it's going to be tough to close against some of the competitors Indiana has. Should mention volleyball off to a good start. Won this morning to move to 4-0 over Northern Kentucky. Match tonight, Friday night, at home against Western Michigan. They had a pretty big win over Miami last weekend, a reverse sweep. They were down 2-0, and they came back and won the last 3 sets. That's in volleyball, they call that a reverse sweep. So that was a kind of a big momentum win, non-conference early in the season. Another big weekend for men's soccer. Todd Yeagley's team will be at Notre Dame on Sunday. That's obviously a pretty big sort of regional showdown in that sport. You might even go so far as in soccer specifically to call IU Notre Dame a regional rivalry. Indiana's already got quality wins over St. Louis and Oregon State. They drew with Clemson. They will be wrapping most of their non-conference. They have a gap in the Big Ten schedule where they'll play at Kentucky and then they'll play Hanover at home. But the bulk of their non-conference schedule is going to wrap up soon. The Big Ten slate starts I believe next week. So one more chance to kind of add a quality result, whether a win or a draw, on the road against Notre Dame for Indiana this weekend on Sunday. And then last but not least, just to tease what you can expect from us on Saturday. Mike Neislick and I, as always, will both be inside the Memorial Stadium press box. We'll have the live blog at indystar.com/sports. We will have the immediate reaction content at heraldtimesonline.com and indystar.com/sports. We'll have the postgame podcasts, postgame Mind Your Banners. As always, we'll have Mike's takeaways, my insider, videos. We'll have press conference videos from player press availability, all that kind of stuff. So a lot for you to digest and sift through, both at indystar.com/sports, Herald Times Online, and here on the YouTube channel this weekend. But for now, for the Indianapolis Star, I'm Zach Osterman. This has been your Friday Rundown for September 5th, 2025. Again, please remember to like and subscribe on the YouTube channel and check back as often as you can. We'll try to keep it as fresh as we can for you. Thank you so much for watching. We'll talk to you soon.